Welcome to Cassandra Revenge Stories, where quiet women turn betrayal into reckoning.
My name is Amelia King. I'm 32 years old, and I'm sitting in the cab of my truck outside a storage unit in Elkin, North Carolina, holding a letter my grandmother wrote before she died. The paper is yellow at the edges. The handwriting is hers. That careful, slanted cursive she learned in a one-room schoolhouse in Wilkes County in 1949. I haven't opened it yet. I'm just holding it, because once I open it, the woman who raised me will speak to me one more time, and after that, never again. The cedar chest is open on the passenger seat. Inside it, a deed to 40 acres of land I didn't know existed, a life insurance policy with my name on it, and this letter. The clerk inside that office just told me my grandmother paid the rent on this unit for 10 years before she died. 10 years of hiding something. 10 years of waiting for me to find it. And I have to ask you something before I read what she wrote. What would you do if you discovered the person who loved you most had to hide that love just to keep it safe? Welcome back to our channel. This is a place for the people who learned, the hard way, that family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who shows up, and sometimes the one who showed up the hardest had to do it from the other side of a grave. If this story finds you somewhere tender tonight, do me one small favor. Tap the like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop your state in the comments so I know where you're listening from. I read them, all of them, and I'll tell you why before this story is over. To understand how I ended up in that truck, holding that letter, you have to go back. You have to go all the way back to a pull-out couch in a sewing room in Elkin, and a woman named Opal who taught a little girl how to read a blood pressure cuff before she could read a chapter book. I grew up in my grandmother's house because nobody else wanted me. That's not me being dramatic. That's the literal court record. When my parents divorced, I was 7 years old, and they sat in two separate lawyers' offices, and each said the other one should take custody. Neither one wanted me. My mother, Linda, was 28 and wanted her freedom. My father wanted his new girlfriend in Charlotte. So my grandmother, Opal, drove down from Elkin in her brown Chevy Caprice, packed my clothes into 2 trash bags, and took me home with her. I slept on a pull-out couch in her sewing room for the next 11 years. I can still tell you exactly what that room smelled like. Cedar, because of the chest she kept her quilting fabric in. Coffee, because she drank Maxwell House from a percolator from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. And rose hand lotion, because her hands cracked from the cotton fibers, and she'd rub Jergens into them every night while we watched the local news. She was 61 years old when I came to live with her. She was tired. She'd already raised 2 kids, my mother and my Aunt Deborah, and she should have been done. But she looked at me on her porch with my trash bags and she said, "Well, sugar, you're home now." And I was. For 11 years, I was home. She taught me to read vital signs before I knew what they were called. Every morning at 6:15, she'd sit at the kitchen table and hold out her arm, and I'd wrap the old blue cuff around her bicep and pump the bulb until the dial climbed past 200. Then I'd slowly let it down, watching her face, listening through the stethoscope she bought me for my 8th birthday. "What do you hear, baby?" she'd ask. And I'd say, 128/82. And she'd nod and write it down in a little spiral notebook she kept by the salt shaker. That notebook is in the cedar chest right now. I just found it. 23 years of her blood pressure, written in my handwriting from age 8, then age 12, then age 16. She kept every single reading. That's the woman my mother told everyone I'd abandoned. I joined the Army Reserve at 19 because I wanted to be a medic. I wanted to do the thing Opal had pointed me toward, taking care of bodies, taking care of fear. I deployed twice. I came home both times. I went through paramedic school while working night shifts at a Sheetz off Interstate 77, sleeping 4 hours a day for 18 months. I made it. I became an EMT supervisor in Fayetteville. I made $48,000 a year, which isn't much, but it was enough to send my mother $600 a month because she said her disability check kept getting delayed. It was enough to co-sign a $12,000 car loan for my younger brother Marcus because he said he needed reliable transportation for a new job. It was enough to cover Linda's rent 3 separate times when she called crying at midnight. I did all of that, and I drove 90 minutes each way every Saturday for 4 straight years to sit with my grandmother in a nursing home in Statesville while she slowly forgot the names of everyone she'd ever loved, except mine. She always remembered mine. 208 Saturdays. I counted them once on a slow shift. I drove that stretch of US 421 so many times I could tell you which exits had the cleanest bathrooms and which truck stops had coffee that wouldn't tear up your stomach. I brought her photographs every week. I brought her a thermos of the chicken and rice soup she used to make me when I had strep throat. I brushed her hair because the aides didn't have time to, and her hair was the long white silk it had been my entire life, and she was proud of it. Some Saturdays she knew me. Some Saturdays she thought I was her sister Bernice, who'd been dead since 1987. Some Saturdays she just held my hand and we watched the birds outside her window and she didn't say anything at all. Those were the hardest ones, and they were also the ones I miss the most now, because she was still breathing, and I could still smell the rose lotion on her hands. She died on a Tuesday in February. I was on a 36-hour shift in Fayetteville, running back-to-back calls. My phone was dead in a charger in the rig. By the time I got the voicemail from the nursing home, she'd been gone for 6 hours. By the time I drove the 2.5 hours up to Statesville, my mother had already been there. My mother had signed the release. My mother had cleared the room. Every single thing my grandmother owned, her clothes, her photographs, her Bible, her wedding ring, the 14 quilts she'd stitched over 30 years, and the 1962 Singer featherweight sewing machine she had promised to me in front of 6 witnesses at Christmas in 2019. Every single thing was already gone. The room was empty. The bed was stripped. The nightstand was wiped down. A nurse I'd never seen before told me, "Your mama said she was the next of kin. She had the paperwork." I had medical power of attorney. I'd had it for 4 years, but I was on a shift, and Linda was faster, and the nursing home didn't ask twice. The first thing I did was sit down on the bare mattress where my grandmother had died, and I cried. But not the way you'd think. It was a flat cry. No sound, just water running down my face while I stared at the indentation in the pillow where her head had been. The aide kept asking if I wanted water. I kept saying no. After a while, I stood up, drove back to Fayetteville, and finished my shift. Because what else do? You finish your shift. You eat a granola bar in the rig. You answer the next call. The world doesn't pause because the only person who ever fought for you stopped breathing. I want to tell you about the months that came after, because they were the worst months of my life. And they were also the months when somebody I didn't know was watching, was already preparing my rescue. While I was drowning, somebody was building me a raft. I just didn't know it yet. The week after Opal died, I called my mother to ask about the quilts. There were 14 of them, and everyone had a name. The wedding ring quilt she'd made for her own marriage in 1956. The cathedral window quilt she'd made when my Aunt Deborah was born. The double Irish chain she'd made me when I joined the army, with each square holding a fabric scrap from a different chapter of my life. A piece of my high school graduation dress, a piece of the curtains from the sewing room, a piece of my grandfather's last work shirt. Those quilts were the only history my family had. They were our photo album in fabric. They were 30 years of her hands. I asked Linda where they were. She said, "Oh, I sold all that to a dealer in Asheville. He gave me $1,200 for the whole lot. Was easier than dragging them all to Goodwill. $1,200 for 14 quilts, each one a year of her life, sold for $85 apiece to a man in Asheville who probably resold them at $600 each at a craft fair within the month." I didn't speak. Linda kept talking. She said, "And I told everyone you said it was fine. You were deployed anyway. You can't carry quilts around in the army. I was not deployed. I'd been home for 14 months. But she'd told the whole family that I was, because nobody fact-checks Linda. Nobody ever has. She is the kind of woman who lies the way other people breathe, without thinking about it, without effort. Just a constant low exhale of small dishonesties that nobody bothers to challenge, because what's the point? The point, I would learn later, is that those small dishonesties had cost my grandmother 4 years of believing I'd abandoned her. The point is that they cost me my entire family. The next thing I lost was the sewing machine. Aunt Deborah told me about that at Thanksgiving, leaning over the sweet potato casserole like she was sharing gossip about a neighbor. Linda pawned the featherweight, she said. Got $75 for it at that place on East Innes Street. $75. That machine was worth $2,400. My grandmother had bought it the year my mother was born. She'd taught me to sew on it when I was 9. She had promised it to me, out loud, at the Christmas dinner 2 years before she died, and Aunt Deborah had been sitting right there, and Marcus had been sitting right there, and Linda had been sitting right there, and Linda had smiled and said, "Of course, Mama. Of course Amelia should have it." $75. I asked Aunt Deborah why she didn't stop her. Aunt Deborah said, "Honey, you know how your mama is." Yes, I know how my mama is. The thing about Linda is that she has a particular smile when she's about to lie about money. It pulls up on one side only. I've watched that smile my entire life. She smiled when she said disability check. She smiled when she said the rent was late. She smiled when she told me Marcus needed help with the car insurance. And then those smiles bought plane tickets to Myrtle Beach, to Gulf Shores, to a cruise out of Charleston she posted about on Facebook in March of the year my grandmother died, 3 weeks after she told me she didn't have grocery money. I had been sending her $600 a month for 3 years. That's $21,600, plus the rent I covered, plus the car I co-signed for Marcus, the one he stopped paying after 5 months, the one that absolutely demolished my credit score. I added it all up one night on the back of a shift report. $46,000. I had given my mother and my brother $46,000 over 4 years, while sleeping in a 1-bedroom apartment in Fayetteville with a window unit that died every August. And the whole time, Linda was telling the family that I'd gone off the rails after deployment, that I couldn't hold a relationship, that I'd become hard, cold, angry, military. My boyfriend at the time broke up with me because Marcus told him I had anger issues. Marcus told him that because Linda paid Marcus's car insurance, and Marcus has always known which side of the bread the butter goes on. I lost a man I'd loved for 2 years because my brother needed his insurance covered. Linda built a whole story about me, a story where I was unstable, dangerous, distant, and she sold it to my own family for the price of free babysitting and the occasional Sunday dinner. By the time my grandmother died, every single person in my family thought I was the problem. Every single one. And I didn't know it yet. Christmas was the worst of it. Marcus brought his new girlfriend, a sweet, oblivious woman named Tara, and we were all sitting at the table eating ham and green beans, and Tara turned to me and said, "It's so nice to finally meet you. Marcus's mom told me so much about you. She said you never visited your grandma, that you were too busy with your own life out in Fayetteville." The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at his plate. He didn't say a word. He didn't correct her. He didn't say, "Actually, Amelia drove up every Saturday for 4 years." He just sat there and let it stand, because Linda was at the head of the table and Linda paid his car insurance. Linda jumped in fast. "Oh, honey, we don't need to get into all that at the dinner table," and changed the subject to Tara's job at the dental office. And that was the moment, sitting there with cold green beans on my fork, that I understood something I had been refusing to understand for years. My family didn't love me. They had never loved me. They had used me, and they had used my grandmother. And now that my grandmother was gone, they were going to use me harder because nobody was going to stop them. I drove home from Christmas dinner that night, and I cried so hard on I-40, I had to pull over at a rest stop in Greensboro and sit in the parking lot for 40 minutes. I remember thinking, very clearly, I am 32 years old, and I am alone in the world. The one person who saw me is dead. There is no one left who knows what I am actually like. There is no one left who can vouch for me. They have won, and I am the villain in a story they made up. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to prove a negative to people who decided what I was a long time ago. I did not know, sitting in that rest stop parking lot, that a manila envelope was already in the mail to my apartment. I did not know that 3 months after my grandmother's death, the chaplain from her nursing home had finally opened a sealed instruction packet and was getting ready to send me a Bible. I did not know that the woman who loved me most had spent the last 3 years of her life planning, with quiet, legal precision, exactly what would happen on the day I sat in that rest stop and decided I was alone. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and I thought, there is nothing left for me. I was wrong. There was a tree farm. There was a letter. There was a chaplain named Diane. And there were 47 other letters in a shoebox, waiting for me to find them. The Bible arrived on a Tuesday in May. Plain manila envelope, return address from a Reverend Diane Oates at a nursing home in Statesville. I almost didn't open it that night. I had worked 16 hours. I was bone-tired, and I figured it was some kind of bereavement card. I put it on the kitchen counter and went to sleep. The next morning, I opened it over coffee, and there was Opal's Bible, the King James Version she'd carried since 1962, with the cracked black leather cover and the gold-edged pages that had gone soft from 40 years of being thumbed. A small note from Reverend Oates was tucked inside the front cover. It said, "Your grandmother asked me to hold this for 3 months and then send it to you directly. She said you would understand when the time came. She said to tell you, the key is where she said it would be." That was it. I held the Bible in both hands and I stared at that note for a long time. The key is where she said it would be. My grandmother had never told me about any key. I thumbed through the pages. Nothing fell out. I shook it gently. Nothing. I held it up to the light, and that's when I saw it. A thin, rectangular bulge in the binding where the leather had been carefully slit and resealed. I went and got my paramedic shears from my work bag, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I very carefully cut the binding open. A small brass key fell out onto the table. There was a tag on it. The tag said, in her handwriting, "You store it, Elkin, Unit 144. Don't tell your mother." I held that key in my palm and my hand started shaking. I want to be honest with you. My body knew before my brain did. My hands shook before I'd even processed what I was looking at. Don't tell your mother. My grandmother, who had never said a critical word about anyone in her life, who had defended Linda even when Linda was at her worst. My grandmother had written, in cursive on a brass tag, "Don't tell your mother." That sentence alone told me she knew. She knew what Linda was. She had known the whole time. She had been protecting something, and she had been protecting it from her own daughter. I called out of work the next morning and drove to Elkin. 2 hours and 10 minutes. I remember almost nothing about the drive except that I cried twice and had to wipe my face with a fast food napkin. The U-Store. It was on a back road outside town. Low metal buildings, gravel lot, fading sign. The clerk inside was a man in his 60s with a clipboard and reading glasses on a beaded chain. I gave him the unit number. I gave him my ID. He looked it up on his computer, and he was quiet for a long moment, scrolling. Then he set down his clipboard and looked at me over his glasses, and he said, "Ma'am, This unit's been paid through 2034. 2034. My grandmother had prepaid 22 years of rent on this storage unit. She had set this up when she was 78 years old, and she had funded it through a date she could not possibly have hoped to live to see. She had built me a vault, and she had walked away. He walked me out to Unit 144. He cut the lock for me because I didn't have the combination, just the key for what was inside. He rolled the door up and stepped back, and I walked into a space that was almost completely empty, except for a cedar chest in the middle of the concrete floor with a small index card taped to the top. The card said, "For Amelia, open alone." I sat down on that concrete floor for a minute. I just sat there, because once I opened it, everything was going to change, and I needed one more minute of not knowing. I needed one more minute of being the woman who thought she was alone. I'd give anything now to have one more minute of being held by my grandmother. But that's not how time works. So I unlocked the chest. Listen, if you're still with me, if you've ever opened something that turned out to be a love letter from someone you couldn't thank, drop one word in the comments. Just one. Whatever the first word is that comes to mind. I want to know how many of us there are. Now let me tell you what was in the chest. A notarized deed, on top, in a clear plastic sleeve. 40 acres of land in Wilkes County, North Carolina. A tree farm. Pine and hardwood, mixed timber, with a small farmhouse on the southern parcel. The deed was in my name only. The transfer had been executed 7 years before my grandmother died, when she was 75 years old. She had owned this land for 22 years and never told anyone. Not Linda. Not Aunt Deborah. Not me. 22 years of property tax payments, made quietly, from an account my mother didn't know existed. Underneath the deed, a life insurance policy. Whole life, paid up, $385,000. Beneficiary, sole and irrevocable, Amelia Renee King. Underneath the policy, the blood pressure notebook I told you about. 23 years of readings in my handwriting. She had kept it. And underneath the notebook, at the bottom of the chest, in an envelope sealed with a piece of clear tape, a letter in her handwriting addressed to me. I carried the letter out to my truck because I couldn't read it in the unit. I needed walls I trusted. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, and I cried for 10 minutes before I could even slit the envelope open. The clerk had gone back inside. The lot was empty. The afternoon was that pale yellow you only get in late May in the foothills. I finally opened it. 3 pages, both sides, in her careful slanted cursive, and a paper clip holding a smaller folded note at the front. The smaller note said, "Sugar, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found the key. I am sorry it took this long. I had to be sure. Read the long letter slow. Don't read it all at once. Take breaks. Drink some water. I love you more than anything I have ever loved in this world. Gran." I had to put it down for a minute. The line, "drink some water," undid me. That was her. That was exactly her. She had been telling me to drink water my whole life. She told me to drink water before bed. She told me to drink water in the morning. She told me to drink water when I was crying. She had reached through death and told me to drink water. I went into the U-Store It office, and the clerk handed me a bottle from his mini fridge without me having to ask. I think he could tell. I went back to the truck. I drank some water. I read the rest. "My Amelia, they are going to tell you I forgot you. They are going to tell you that I lost my mind at the end and didn't know who anybody was. Some of that is true, the losing my mind part. There were days I didn't know what month it was. But I never once forgot you. Not even on the worst days. You were the last name I could say, and I said it every night before I went to sleep. Even when I couldn't remember why. I had to stop. I gripped the steering wheel and I sobbed. I sobbed the way you sob when you've been holding something in for 4 years and somebody finally says the one true thing. I kept reading. I know what your mother has been doing. I have known for a long time. The nurse on the night shift, Miss Tanya. She told me you'd been calling every day and that Linda had taken your name off the approved caller list. She told me you'd been sending cards on every holiday and that Linda had been intercepting them. I didn't believe her at first. I wanted to believe my own daughter wasn't capable of it. But Miss Tanya brought me one of your cards, a Mother's Day card you'd sent me in 2021, and I knew your handwriting, baby. I have known your handwriting since you were 6. I cried for 2 days. I cried because I had spent 2 years believing you'd gone on with your life, the way Linda kept telling me you had. I had written you letters during those 2 years, letters I never sent, because I thought you didn't want to hear from me. 47 letters. I kept them. They're with Reverend Diane. Ask her for them when you're ready, not before. They will hurt to read. But I want you to have every word I ever wrote you, even the words I wrote when I was wrong about you. I sat in that truck, and I cried so hard a man pulled into the lot, started to get out of his car, then looked at me and got back in and drove away. I don't blame him. I would have been afraid of me too. Listen to me now, sugar. I have known your mother her whole life, and I know what she will do when I am gone. She will take everything she can carry out of my room before you can stop her. She will sell my quilts because she has no idea what they mean, and she does not care to learn. She will pawn my featherweight for whatever a man behind a counter offers her. She will tell the family you didn't visit, because she has been telling that story for so long she may even believe it. She will not hurt you on purpose. She will hurt you because hurting you is easier for her than looking at herself. I am sorry for that. I am sorry I made her, and I am sorry I could not unmake what she became. But I have known, for years, what was coming. And I have prepared. The land in Wilkes County is yours. I bought it in 2002 with the money your grandfather left when he died. It is 40 acres of good hardwood and pine, and there is a small house on the south end of it with a tin roof and a wood stove and a well that has never run dry. I have paid the taxes every year out of a separate account at the credit union in North Wilkesboro. The deed is in your name and has been since 2017. Linda cannot touch it. Marcus cannot touch it. Nobody can touch it. It is yours. The insurance policy is also yours. $385,000. I started it in 1998 when I realized I would probably outlive my own savings. I kept it paid up every month, even when I had to choose between the premium and the heating bill. I chose the premium. I want you to use that money the way I would have used it for you if I'd had it while I was alive. Pay off whatever Marcus did to your credit. Pay off your truck. Put some away for emergencies, because emergencies will come. And do something for yourself, baby. Something that has nothing to do with anybody else. Buy yourself a piece of joy. You have spent your whole life buying other people's emergencies. It is your turn. The last thing I want to say. They will tell you I forgot you. I never forgot you. I just hid what matters where only you would look. Inside the Bible because you always loved the Psalms. Inside a storage unit in the town where you grew up. Inside a cedar chest because you helped me pick out that cedar chest at an estate sale in 1998 and you said it smelled like Christmas. I hid these things because if I had told Linda, she would have come for them and she would have spent them and there would have been nothing left for you. I am sorry I had to lie by omission. I am sorry I had to hide my love for you behind a brass key. I should not have had to, but I did, and I did it gladly, and I would do it again 100 times to make sure you ended up sitting wherever you are sitting right now, knowing one thing for sure. You are the great love of my life, Amelia Renee. You always were. I saw you. I saw you the whole time. Drink some water. Take a breath. Go home to the land. I will meet you there in the wind. Gran. I sat in that truck until the sun went down. I read the letter 3 more times. I read it once for the information, once for her voice, and once just to hear her say my name again. When it got dark, I drove to a motel in town and I checked in, and I lay on the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling for most of the night. Around 3 a.m, I started laughing, very quietly, because I realized my grandmother had outmaneuvered my mother from beyond the grave. She had played 22 years of strategic chess with the patience of a woman who had decided, very calmly, that her granddaughter was going to be okay no matter what her daughter did. She had won, and she had let me know she'd won. In the morning, I drove to the chaplain's office at the nursing home. Reverend Diane Oates was about 60, gray hair in a long braid, half glasses on a chain. She knew who I was the second I walked in. She stood up from her desk and she came around and she hugged me without asking, and I let her, because I needed it. She smelled faintly of peppermint and old hymnal paper. The office had a single window that looked out onto a courtyard with a wooden bench and a dogwood tree that was past blooming, and the morning light came in slanted across her desk and lit the dust in the air. Then she sat me down and she said, "Your grandmother told me to give you these when you came." She pulled a shoebox out from a locked drawer. It was a New Balance box, size 8, with the lid worn soft at the corners from being opened and closed many times. She hesitated for a moment and she said, "I want you to know, pastoral confidentiality is the most sacred thing I hold, but Opal wrote me explicit permission to give these to you, in her own hand, signed and dated, so they're yours." She slid the shoebox across the desk. The sound of it scraping the wood was the only sound in the room. Inside, 47 letters, in my grandmother's handwriting on whatever paper had been in reach, lined notebook paper. The backs of grocery receipts, a few sheets of nursing home stationery with the letterhead torn off. Each one addressed to me. Each one folded and dated in the upper right corner in her tiny, careful numerals. The first one was from March of 2021, 2.5 years before she died. I read the first 3 in Diane's office before I had to stop. The first one was angry. She wrote, "Amelia, I don't know what I did wrong, but I want you to know it has been 4 months since you've called and it is breaking my heart." The second one, 2 weeks later, was softer. "I keep thinking about you. I hope you are safe. I hope you are not in any pain." The third one, a month after that, was just one line. "I miss you so much I can't write today." The paper of that one had a faint round stain in the corner. Coffee, maybe, or a tear that had dried with the salt still in it. I touched it with the pad of my thumb and I thought, I will not wash this. I will never wash this. Diane watched me read. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She let the seconds pass. Then she said quietly, "She wrote those when she thought you'd stopped coming. Linda had taken you off the approved caller list and told the front desk you weren't to be put through. Opal didn't know. Miss Tanya, the night nurse, finally told her in the summer of 2022. After that, Opal kept writing, but the letters changed. She started writing them knowing you'd read them someday. She started writing them like a record, like she wanted you to know what she had thought about you, every week, for years." I asked Diane why she had waited 3 months to send the Bible. She folded her hands. She looked at the dogwood out the window for a long beat before she answered. She said, "Opal asked me to. She said she wanted Linda to have time to do whatever Linda was going to do. She said she wanted you to feel the full weight of being alone first, so that when you found her, you would know the difference." She said, and I'm quoting her, "Amelia," she said this exactly, "I want my girl to know what love is by knowing what it isn't first." I sat in Diane's office for a long time. The light moved across the floor. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rattled past and a woman laughed at something I couldn't hear. I think Diane made me tea at some point. I think I drank it. I don't remember leaving. I do remember walking out into the parking lot with the shoebox under my arm and realizing I was carrying more of my grandmother in that cardboard than my mother had managed to steal in a single afternoon. That night, in the motel, I made a decision. I did not call my mother. I did not call my brother. I did not call my Aunt Deborah. I did not call anyone in my family at all. Instead, I did this. I called my credit union and I started the process for the insurance payout. I called my landlord in Fayetteville and gave 30 days notice. I called the EMS director and put in for a transfer to the closest service to North Wilkesboro. I changed my phone number. I drove out to the 40 acres the next morning and I walked the property line by myself, with my grandmother's letter folded in my back pocket, and I cried into the trees she had owned for 22 years without telling anyone she owned them. The pines smelled the way Christmas had always smelled in her sewing room. I put my hand on the bark of a white oak that had to be older than she had been, and I let my forehead rest against it for a long minute, and I felt the rough of the bark press a pattern into my skin that was still there an hour later when I looked in the truck mirror. The farmhouse was small. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a well, a wraparound porch facing west. There was a hummingbird feeder on the porch with nothing in it. The red plastic faded to a soft pink by years of sun. She must have hung that feeder herself. Sometime in the years she came up here alone. I bought sugar that afternoon and filled the feeder, and within 2 hours the hummingbirds came back like they'd been waiting. One of them, a little ruby throat, hovered right at eye level with me for what felt like a full minute, the wings a blur, the eye absolutely steady on mine. I had rehearsed being alone for 6 months. The hummingbird looked at me as if to say, "You were never alone, sugar. You were just looking in the wrong room." I moved in 3 weeks later. I did not tell anyone where I was going. The first time my mother tried to find me was about 30 days in. She called the Fayetteville EMS station. The receptionist, who is a friend of mine named Carla, told her exactly what I'd asked Carla to tell her. "Amelia has transferred. We're not at liberty to say where." Linda called back 3 times that week. Carla told me later she could hear Linda's voice climbing each time, that smile tone hardening into something else. By the 3rd call, there was a tremor in it. "Not grief," Carla said, "but the kind of tremor a person gets when a faucet they had assumed would always run has gone dry." The 4th call, Linda asked Carla outright for my new number. Carla said, "Ma'am, I can't give that out." Linda said, "I am her mother." Carla said, "Yes, ma'am, I understand. I still can't give that out." Linda hung up on her. That was the end of that route. I had moved through the only door my mother knew how to open, and I had closed it behind me. What happened next was not something I orchestrated. I want you to understand this. I didn't push a single domino. I just stopped propping them up. Within 60 days, Linda's rent was 2 months behind because the $600 a month I had been sending was no longer arriving. Within 70 days, Marcus's car was repossessed in the parking lot of his apartment complex at 5:30 in the morning because the co-signed loan I had been quietly making minimum payments on for the last 7 months had finally defaulted. Within 80 days, Linda's beach vacation Facebook posts had stopped because the credit card she'd been funding them on had been frozen for non-payment. Within 90 days, the GoFundMe link started for car trouble, for a medical emergency that nobody in the family had heard about, for help with bills during a difficult season. Aunt Deborah called Marcus to ask if any of it was real. Marcus didn't know. Nobody in the family shared the GoFundMe. Nobody contributed. I learned about all of this through Aunt Deborah, who had finally, after Christmas, after the sewing machine, started questioning Linda, and who had quietly tracked down my new number through a cousin who worked at the credit union. Deborah called me once a month. She didn't ask me to come back. She just told me what was happening, like a weather report. I appreciated that. I told her I was fine. I told her I was on the land. I told her I'd send her a quilt when I figured out how to make one. She laughed. A small, startled laugh, the kind that catches a person off guard. She said, "Honey, your grandmother would die laughing if she could hear you say that." And then she paused, because that joke didn't land the way she meant it. And she said, "Sorry." And I said, "It's okay, Deb. I think Gran would, actually." The second attempt came in month 4. Linda found my address. I still don't know how. Probably through a process server. Probably through some kind of public record search. I have a P.O. box now, and I'd been careful. But you can't be careful enough against a woman who has decided she needs something from you. A letter arrived, handwritten. The handwriting itself was a performance. Slow, careful, the way she writes when she wants something. The envelope was a creamy stationery I had never seen her use in her life. It said, "Amelia, your brother and I are in a very difficult time. I know we've had our problems, but family is family. I lost my mother too. We need to come together. Please call me, Mom." I sat on the porch with that letter for a long time. The sun was going down behind the ridge and turning the underside of the clouds the color of a peach skin. The hummingbirds were doing their last lap before dusk. I read it twice. I felt, and I want to be honest with you, almost nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a quiet, settled clarity. The letter from my mother weighed nothing in my hand. The letter from my grandmother, folded in a frame on the kitchen wall behind me, weighed everything in the world. I knew which one I belonged to. I didn't write back. I burned the letter in the wood stove that night. Not as a gesture, just because it was junk mail. The paper caught fast, the way that thin stationery does, and was gone before I'd finished closing the stove door. A few weeks after that, I drove down to Boone, to a little quilting shop a friend of Diane's had told me about. I'd been making calls for 2 months trying to track down the featherweight. Pawn shops, antique dealers, sewing machine collectors. The trail went cold for a while. Then a woman named Glenda, who runs the shop in Boone, called me back and said she thought she had it. A 1962 Singer featherweight. Came in from an estate dealer who'd bought it off a pawn shop in Salisbury. Serial number matched the one I'd written down from a photograph my grandmother had sent me in 2018. I drove down on a Saturday. The shop smelled like cotton batting and lemon oil, and the faint mineral tang of an old metal radiator running in the back. The machine was sitting on a small wooden table by the window. I knew it the second I walked in. I knew the specific dent on the front plate where Opal had dropped a thimble on it in 1991. I knew the little curl of cellophane tape on the bobbin cover where she'd patched a crack in 1996 and never replaced it because it still worked. I knew the shape of it the way you know a face. Glenda watched me look at it. She didn't say a word. She let me put my hand on the machine first. I asked her the price. She said, $1,800. But honey, if this is what I think it is, just tell me, and we'll figure it out. I told her. I showed her the photograph. Her eyes went wet, but she didn't let them spill. She took 20% off without me asking. I paid her $1,800, $43 and change less than the original asking. And I carried that machine out to my truck like it was a child. I drove it home that night with the machine seat belted in the passenger seat. I set it up in the front window of the farmhouse, in the corner where the morning light comes through best, the way it used to come through Opal's sewing room window in Elkin. The first morning the sun hit it, the chrome of the bobbin winder threw a tiny disk of light onto the ceiling that moved as the sun moved, and I sat watching that little disk travel across the plaster, and I cried again. Then I made coffee, and I sat down at it, and I threaded it for the first time in 15 years. And I sewed a single straight line across a piece of muslin just to hear the sound. The sound of that machine running is one of the most specific sounds of my life. It is a low, even purr, with a tiny click at the end of every stitch where the needle bar resets. It is the sound of being safe. The third attempt came in month 6. This one was Marcus. He drove up unannounced. Somebody had given him directions. I have my suspicions, but I won't name them because it doesn't matter anymore. He pulled into my driveway in a beat-up Civic he'd borrowed from somebody. The front bumper held on with a zip tie, and he got out, and he stood on my porch, and he said, "Mealy, come on. This is ridiculous. Mom is in a bad place. We need you." Mealy is what he called me when we were little. He hadn't called me that in 15 years. He used it now because he thought it would work. I stood on the porch, and I looked at him through the screen door. I noticed that he had aged a lot in 6 months. His shoulders had dropped. His face had thinned out. There was a softness in him I hadn't seen since he was about 12, before Linda figured out what to do with him. He looked like a man who had finally discovered that all the people he'd been leaning on were also leaning on someone, and that the someone had walked away. I opened the screen door, but I didn't step out. I said, "Marcus, I'm not coming back." He started to argue. He started to talk about family, about Opal, about how she would have wanted us all to stick together. His voice cracked once on the word together. I let him talk. I didn't interrupt. I let the silence sit on the porch between us when he was done. 43 seconds passed before I spoke again. I counted them. Old habit from running codes. Then I said, "Did you know Gran wrote me 47 letters?" He stopped. He blinked. He said, "What?" I said, 47 letters. She wrote them in the nursing home. She wrote them because she thought I had abandoned her. She thought that because Linda told her I had. You backed Linda up. Every time. You told my boyfriend I had anger issues. You sat there at Christmas while your girlfriend told me to my face that I never visited Gran, and you didn't say a word. You knew the truth. You chose Linda anyway. His mouth opened. He looked at the porch boards, at the gap between two of them where a sprig of clover had pushed up through. He said, "Mealy." I said, "You can go now, Marcus. I'm not angry. I'm just done." And he stood there for another minute. He looked like he was going to say one more thing. He looked like the one more thing was going to be an apology. But the apology didn't come. The apology has never come. He just nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when a doctor has told him something he already knew. He got back in the Civic, and he drove away. The zip tie on the bumper rattled against the fender all the way down the drive. I watched his taillights disappear down the gravel road, and I felt, and I want to be precise, relief. Not triumph. Not grief. Just the relief of a door I had been holding open with my shoulder for 30 years finally being allowed to close. It is 1 year now since I moved to the land. I am sitting on the porch right now, writing this down on a yellow legal pad, the way Opal used to write her grocery lists. The sun is going down behind the tree line she secretly owned for 22 years. The hummingbird feeder is empty again because I haven't refilled it this week, but I will tomorrow morning, and they will come back, because they always come back. The featherweight is in the window behind me. Opal's Bible is open on the kitchen table to the 84th Psalm, because that was the one she had earmarked the deepest. The cedar chest is at the foot of my bed. I want to tell you what happened to the rest of it. The insurance money paid off Marcus's loan damage on my credit and my truck, and gave me a 6-month emergency fund. I put the rest into a low-cost index fund the way a financial advisor in Wilkesboro told me to. I started a small business managing the timber harvest on a rotating section of the property, with the help of a forester named Hank, who knew Opal. Yes, of course he knew Opal, because everybody up here knew Opal, because Opal had been quietly tending this land for 2 decades while pretending she didn't own it. Hank told me, the first time we walked the back 40 together, that she used to come up 4 times a year and pay him in cash to thin the underbrush, and that she always brought him a thermos of chicken and rice soup. I cried into my sleeve, and he pretended not to see. I am still an EMT. I took a position with the Wilkes County Service. I run calls on these back roads 3 days a week, and the rest of the time I am here, on this porch, with the wind in the pines and the cicadas, and the sound of a sewing machine I have started using again because I am teaching myself badly to make a quilt. Opal would die laughing. I have to believe she's laughing somewhere. About Linda. I don't know where she is now. Aunt Deborah told me, 3 months ago, that Linda moved in with a friend in Charlotte after she lost the apartment. I don't know if that's still true. I don't know if she's working. I don't know if she's safe. There is a part of me, the part that is still her daughter, that wants to know. There is another part of me, the part that read 47 letters from a woman who died believing her granddaughter had abandoned her, that does not want to know. The two parts of me have made peace with each other. I will not look for her. If she finds me, I will not open the door. I do not wish her harm. I just don't wish her anything at all. That is the place I have arrived at, and I think it is the right place. The statistics on this are sobering. Roughly 40% of older Americans report being financially exploited by a family member at some point in their later years, and only 1 in 24 cases ever gets reported. Most of those cases involve a single adult child, usually one positioned as the caregiver by default, quietly redirecting resources that were never theirs to redirect. The ones who pay for it are the grandchildren, the siblings, the cousins who weren't watching closely enough. My grandmother knew this, not by statistics, but by instinct. She had lived 60 years with my mother. She knew what she had made, and she protected me anyway. The fourth wall break I owe you is this. If you are listening to this and somebody has been telling you for years that you weren't there, check again. Check the dates. Check the texts. Check the credit card statements. Check the people who were on the ground with the person you loved. Sometimes the loudest voice in the family is the loudest because they have the most to cover up. And sometimes the person who loved you most couldn't tell you while they were alive because the people who should have helped them tell you were standing in the way. Look for the locked boxes. Look in the Bibles. Look in the storage units. Look in the handwriting of the people who saw you. Check again. I used to think love was loud. I used to think love was the people who showed up to the cookouts and gave the toasts and called you on your birthday. I was wrong. Love is quieter than that. Love pays the storage unit rent for 10 years without telling anyone. Love hides a brass key in a Bible binding because it knows you are the one who will look. Love writes 47 letters to a granddaughter it thinks has abandoned it, and then keeps writing after it learns the truth. Love is a woman who, at 75 years old, drives alone to a credit union in North Wilkesboro to make sure her granddaughter is going to be okay in 2034. And grief. Grief is its own thing. The hardest part of all of this, the part that I will carry for the rest of my life, is not what Linda did. Linda is just Linda. The hardest part is knowing that the woman who loved me most had to hide that love in a locked chest to keep it safe from her own daughter. That is a sorrow that doesn't have a bottom. I sit on this porch sometimes and I feel it as cleanly as I feel the wind. My grandmother had to be strategic about loving me. She had to be clever about it. She had to be silent about it. She had to plan it like a military operation. She should not have had to. She did it anyway, and she did it perfectly. And the cost of that perfection is that she went into the ground believing she had to hide her love for me to give it to me. I cry about that maybe once a week. I don't think it will ever stop. I don't want it to stop. It is the price of being loved that completely. So that's the story. That is what happened when my family sold my grandmother's quilt collection while I was deployed and told everyone I gave permission. That is what happened next. There was one cedar chest, there was one brass key inside a Bible binding, and there was one porch in Wilkes County where a woman my grandmother believed in finally sat down and rested. If you made it this far, thank you. Truly. I told you earlier I read the comments. I do. And the reason is, this story is one of thousands. And every time someone tells me about the storage unit they found, or the letter they found in a coat pocket, or the recipe card with the handwriting they recognized, I get to feel like my grandmother's letter is still being read out loud somewhere by somebody. So tell me yours, if you have one. Tell me what your grandmother left you that nobody else noticed. Tell me what the loudest person in your family didn't want you to find. If this story sat with you tonight, hit the like button, subscribe so the next one finds you, and share it with one person who needs to hear it. Just one. Take care of yourself. Drink some water. Call the person who actually shows up for you. And if there's